Both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 share the exact same USB-C connector on the bottom of the console. However, the difference between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 is that the Switch 2 has used some sort of encoder that makes it essentially only compatible with the pack-in Nintendo Switch 2 dock. And for some people, this is a bit of an issue because they may have purchased smaller or more streamlined docks or secondary docks with the previous Switch and have come to find out that they just simply don't work with the Switch 2. However, a company called Antank, or if you look on Amazon, sometimes referred to as Siwaku, I believe I'm saying that correctly, has cracked the encoding software that Nintendo's used and been able to integrate it into their slim style dock. So if you're looking for a secondary dock system or just trying to replace your general Switch 2 dock for maybe potential aesthetic reasons, Antank has developed something that works. And in this video, I'm going to go over some of the particulars on this dock, some of the downsides to it, and some of the reasons why it's worth the $50 to swap out or have as an alternative dock system for your Switch 2. So let's take a look. So full transparency, Antank actually reached out to me directly to ask me if I wanted to try this dock out for a review. And I was actually in the market for a secondary dock. I wanted one for my upstairs so I could play my Switch 2 on my living room television. So this was a welcome coincidence. So getting into the actual packaging, you have to understand I've been given multiple different controllers and accessories for review by companies I hadn't really heard of. And one of the things that I always highlight is that the packaging is typically either bland or in some cases non-existent. This packaging here though for the S3 Max dock looks good. It looks like a premium quality product and it's relatively small and relatively streamlined. However, pulling it out of the box, there's not really much to it. You essentially get a well-packaged dock, or the dock itself, out of the packaging with an instructions guide. One thing I want to highlight, however, is that this comes with no connectors, no wires, nothing. So the downside to this out of the gate is that you are supposed to have a recommended power supply. If you look online, it's recommended you use Nintendo's official power supply. So that is a consideration with this device, right? Now, the HDMI as well, you should be ideally using a 4K based HDMI if you're going to use a device like this and want to take advantage of the Switch 2's capabilities. However, getting beyond that, the dock itself, incredibly easy to set up. A little easier than the pack-in Switch 2 dock purely because all the components or all the plugs are directly on the back. There's no cover facing it. You just plug in and essentially play. However, the first thing I noticed out of the box when I set up my Switch 2 with this device is that the screen or the colors, the HDR colors, looked very washed out compared to the official Switch 2 dock. However, after doing a bit of digging and going online, apparently this is a common issue with this device. And fortunately, Antank has actually released a proper firmware patch or update for this device that's relatively simple to use. Granted, you have decent computer knowledge, but essentially just plug the USB-C into your computer, load up the application that Antank's released, and click update. After the update, I could not find a difference between the coloration between my official Switch 2 dock versus the Antank dock. So as that goes, it's relatively one-to-one in terms of quality, efficiency, and all the output. So as far as output goes, after installing the firmware update, everything appears to function very well. One of the things though that I do want to highlight is one of the differences between this device and the Switch 2 is we actually have a button on the back to switch between the Switch and the screen. A little finicky at first, but once you get used to it, it generally works and seems to work well. The other thing though that I want to highlight, and this has been a point of contention online and also a concern of mine with this device, And it's that the way this device is designed, there doesn't seem to be any sort of airflow feature to it. So what I mean is there's no fan, and you really just have probably like a 1/4 of an inch wide gap to allow the bottom fans of the Switch 2 to exhaust. So I've used this for extended playtime, and I can't report that there's been anything weird or any issues that have occurred with this device, but it is a concern. It's a concern in the way that I'm not sure if using this device for long periods of time will result in the Switch 2 overheating. However, we do also have to highlight the fact that this device versus the official Switch 2 dock is open. So what I mean is we don't have a cover, we don't have a back grate. We basically just have the Switch 2 sitting in open airspace. So granted you're not playing in some hot and humid environment, there's a strong chance that this will cool itself down. I've seen some Reddit posts with mixed testing saying it does or it doesn't heat up, but that would be the only concern. However, if you're like me, a dock like this really is something that I'm purely purchasing for a secondary screen. It's not my dedicated dock or my dedicated docking system. For the most part, this device will get play in my living room, probably for 1 hour bursts when I want to play Mario Kart upstairs with my kids or something like that. So that is a consideration. Now, overall, I will say that for the $50 or so, and that's Canadian, so in the States it's probably like 35 or something, but for $50 Canadian, if you want an alternative dock, or for some reason you have to replace your Switch 2 dock, I think there is a lot of value here. I think this is a generally good and solid device. I just would err on the side of caution with the fact that the airflow portion could potentially lead to some problems. And again, this is speculation. I can't say I've reported problems with this device. It's just, it was the only main knock that I would have at it. But again, for $50, if you're looking for a secondary docking station, I think that this is incredibly reasonable and pretty well built and very simple and straightforward to use in your home.